Welcome back to the deep dive. We're getting straight into it today. We're exploring a concept our source material labels Palestinianism. Our goal, as always, is just to unpack the ideology presented in these sources, where it comes from, its effects, based only on what we've been given.
Right. And to frame it, the material sets up Palestinianism almost as a counterpoint to Edward Said's idea, Orientalism. It digs into how Palestinians view themselves, mainly through this thing called the ideology of return.
The ideology of return.
Yeah, and this is presented as really central to what Schwartz and Einat Wilf specifically term the war of return.
Yeah.
The sources we looked at see this whole ideology as, well, a reaction to Zionism.
Yeah.
And they analyze it using some interesting frameworks.
Like Rene Girard.
Exactly, Girard's mimetic rivalry, and also Elias Canetti's idea of a vengeful religion of lament. Quite the mix.
Definitely sounds like a deep dive. So for you listening, picture yourself here with us, just looking through this material, trying to understand the perspectives laid out impartially. Okay, let's get into it. These core beliefs, or myths, as the source calls them, what are the foundational pieces of Palestinianism?
So the source lays out a few key ones. First, this really powerful idea of a lost paradise. It's described as this idealized and fictive prelapsarian Eden past of perfect bliss.
Fictive, okay. So like an imagined perfect time before the fall, so to speak. Sort of golden age that maybe wasn't quite real but feels very real.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. The source really stresses the fictive part. Second, this paradise, it says, was destroyed by a catastrophe, the Nakba. And this Nakba is framed as being of unprecedented dimension.
Unprecedented.
Yeah, leading to what's described as the greatest suffering that any human beings have ever known, and also the greatest injustice of all time.
Wow. Heavy stuff. And does the source point fingers? Who or what is blamed for this catastrophe?
Directly Zionism. It's called the most diabolic and inhuman enterprise ever. That's a direct quote.
Okay.
And the fourth belief is described as an absolute apocalyptic belief. The belief that the Nakba will be reversed by the return of all Palestinian refugees. And this includes the restitution of the lost paradise.
And that paradise, how is it pictured?
Specifically as a place emptied of Jewish presence from the river to the sea. That exact phrase is used.
Right. Okay, beyond these core beliefs, the source gets into some, what it terms cognitive bizarrenesses. What kind of unusual ways of thinking about the conflict does it highlight?
Well, one really interesting point is how the conflict is seen as a zero-sum game, and not just for the group, but individually.
Individually, how so?
The source claims, and again, this is the source's claim, that each prosperous Israeli owes his prosperity to the expropriation he has inflicted on a Palestinian. He calls it a Pareto optimal situation.
Pareto optimal. Yeah. Okay, for our listeners, that basically means zero sum, right? If one side gets better off, the other has to get worse off. No win-win possible in this view.
Exactly. No win-win. It's strictly one up, one down. The source even uses this analogy of quantum elementary particles.
Quantum. Okay, go on.
It says, many Palestinians see themselves as if they were entangled with an Israelis even when they are separated by a large distance. If an Israeli feels joy, the Palestinian feels sadness, and vice versa.
Wow. So like a weird psychic link of suffering. One person's happiness directly causing the other's sadness, even across distances. That's quite a concept presented there.
It really is. A very deeply intertwined inverse emotional state, as the source describes it. And then there's the view of suffering itself.
How so?
The source claims that in this view, the suffering of the Palestinians is the most extreme suffering that ever existed.
Okay.
And it notes this is kind of typified by their lack of solidarity with other comparable causes.
Such as?
Well, the example given is the plight of the Ukrainians.
Huh. Okay, that's a specific observation from the source. And what about this all or nothing idea?
Yeah, that's another key cognitive point mentioned. No partial outcome is acceptable. It's all or nothing. It goes on. If the liberation of Palestine is incomplete, it is as if it were none. Nothing is better than something.
Nothing is better than something. That's absolute. And that seems to lead right into this next section the source has, which it calls the delusion of victory. What's the question it's raising about, winning completely?
It asks this really pointed question. Let me quote it directly. Has no Palestinianist asked himself what would be left of the land from the river to the sea in the case of a full victory of their deranged project?
Deranged project. Strong words from the source there.
Very, it continues. What spoils will they win after having destroyed the Jewish state and expelled all the Jews? Do they really believe that they will inherit something more than scorched earth and a lunar landscape?
Yeah, that's a bleak picture. Does the source offer any historical comparisons to back this up?
It does, yeah. It points to Angola and Mozambique, saying they expelled all its white settlers and became poor, backward countries.
Mm.
And it also asks, has anyone considered what kind of nightmarish country Algeria has become after expelling the Europeans?
Okay, but there's a key difference noted about how those countries achieved independence, isn't there? Something the source highlights.
That's right. Crucial point. The source states these countries, Angola, Mozambique, Algeria, they ultimately obtained their independence through direct negotiations and peace agreements, something that Palestinian leaders refused to do. That's the contrast drawn.
I see.
And there's another layer here. The source makes a broader point about decolonization in general. It suggests it often failed, attributing this failure partly to Soviet support for national liberation movements.
How so?
The idea presented is that the Soviets aimed to undermine capitalism by getting these movements to basically tear down the existing administrative structures left by the colonizers. But the source contrasts this with places like Bahrain, India, Israel, Singapore.
Right, the ones it considers successful.
Exactly. It argues they succeeded because they retained these colonial administrative frameworks, which apparently helped stability and development.
So the argument is it matters how you gain independence and what you keep from the old system. Which brings us back to the ideology itself. How does something like this, with these specific views, actually, survive, get passed on? The source talks about material conditions.
Yeah, it gets very practical here. It really pushes back on the idea that ideologies are just indestructible forces floating around. It says ideologies don't have legs nor wings or wheels. They need people to carry them, and people need food and shelter.
Makes sense.
If the faucet that feeds these people is turned off, there is no more ideology. Pretty blunt.
Very blunt. So, tracing the history, how does the source say Palestinianism actually took shape as an ideology? Was it always like this?
Well, it suggests it started more organically, as a spontaneous product of Palestinian individual and collective imagination. But then, it claims, in the early 60s, it was shaped into an ideology by KGB experts that promoted the creation of the PLO.
KGB experts. Okay, that's a specific historical claim.
Yes. And from that point, the source argues it became an institutionalized product, run through a well-organized educational and propaganda system, and crucially sustained by well-funded organizations that have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo.
A vested interest, how?
Because, the source argues, the chronic conflict has become an important source of revenue for millions of beneficiary, perpetual, and hereditary refugees and the officials who serve them.
So a whole economy built around the conflict itself, according to this view, which then leads to what the source calls anthropological damage. What kind of societal impact is described?
It describes a pretty grim picture, calling it a nefarious social experiment, where a significant portion of the population has relied solely on charity for over 4 generations.
4 generations. Wow.
Yeah. It asks you to imagine. Imagine a community of millions where no one has ever held a job, neither their parents, grandparents, nor great-grandparents. And then it says, this scenario encapsulates the Palestinian work-allergic society.
Work-allergic society. That is certainly a provocative term used by the source, definitely controversial. So given that description, what about the hopes some people had for Gaza becoming, say, a new Singapore? How does the source explain why that didn't happen?
Well, the source offers a very specific and, again, controversial explanation. It says the failure of that aspiration is primarily due to its lack of a substantial Chinese and Indian population that could have facilitated such a development.
Really? It attributes it to demographics like that?
That's the argument presented, yes. Instead of that kind of population, it suggests the region is marked by a sense of entitlement among Palestinians, where the notion of working to earn a living seems almost eccentric. Again, these are the direct and very pointed arguments from the source material itself.
Understood. Definitely pointed. Okay, let's shift to the theoretical side. The source uses Rene Girard's theory of mimetic rivalry. Can you unpack that for us? How does it apply here?
Sure. So Girard's basic idea is that our desires aren't really our own. They're influenced by others. We want what others want. This creates a triangle. You, the desire, the thing you want, object, and the person who models that desire for you, model mediator.
Okay.
Now, when 2 people desire the same thing, especially if they're similar and copying each other's desires, boom, rivalry. Competition escalates. Girard talks about how this imitation turns friends into rivals, Jealousy fuels competition, and conflict escalates.
To the point where it's not even about the object anymore.
Exactly. The source notes the focus shifts from the object to the act of competing itself. It becomes about the rivalry.
I see. So it's like wanting the same piece of land isn't just about the land, it's about beating the rival who also wants it. Applied here.
That's the implication drawn from Girard's theory in the source, yes.
Okay, and then there's Elias Canetti's concept, the vengeful religion of lament. How does that piece fit in?
Canetti looked at how expressions of collective grief, especially religious ones, can sometimes morph into justifications for violence. He focused particularly on Abrahamic faiths. These religions of lament, they channel shared sorrow, but in doing so can foster a strong sense of victimhood and a desire for revenge.
Creating a cycle.
Yes, a cycle of violence. Canetti saw this pattern where communal mourning, like, say, Shiite rituals during Ashura, could shift focus towards justifying violence against perceived enemies. He saw it as a recurring thing in monotheistic religions, grief, identity, leading to hostility towards outsiders.
And does Canetti connect to Girard's ideas at all?
Interestingly, the source notes that Canetti also applies mimetic theory, suggesting that even the imitation of grief can fuel rivalry. Lamentation itself becomes a trigger in these cycles of violence.
Fascinating. So combining Girard and Canetti, the source seems to be painting a picture where mimetic desire sparks the initial rivalry, and then collective lament, amplified mimetically, turns it into this ongoing vengeful cycle.
That seems to be the synthesis presented, yes, using these psychoanthropological lenses to explain the dynamics.
Which brings us to the final major point, the argument that Palestinianism is a reaction to Zionism. What's the historical case made here?
Well, citing scholars like Aria Evaneri and Daniel Pipes, the source claims something quite specific. It says that the actual Zionist settlement and its desire for the land attracted more Muslim migrants from all over the Ottoman Empire than it attracted Jews.
More Muslim migrants than Jewish migrants. Where did they come from?
The source lists places like Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, but also Albania, Bosnia, Circassia, Chechnya, even Uzbekistan.
So the source is arguing it wasn't purely the Zionist desire for the land that drew people.
Exactly, it clarifies. The magnet wasn't the Zionist desire for the land, but more concretely the economic growth that resulted from the drying of the marshes. Marshes that apparently covered more than half the territory and were malaria-infested.
And it credits Jewish settlers with drying them.
Yes, it notes that most of the first Jewish settlers contracted malaria in their successful effort to dry these.
Okay, so how does this economic migration, in this view, then spark Palestinianism?
The argument goes like this. Once that, thanks to the Zionist efforts, the land became largely habitable and on the way to becoming prosperous. The imitation of desire developed in the Arab-speaking population. Remember Girard?
Right, the mimetic desire, seeing prosperity and wanting it too.
Precisely. Leading, the source says, to social competition and escalation of conflict. This initial embryonic form of Palestinianism, fueled by repeated defeats and frustrations on the Arab side, then evolved into the full-fledged vengeful religion of lament, i.e. the death cult that we know today. Again, using the source's very direct terminology.
Death cult. Strong framing to end on. Well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground today, unpacking a really dense and definitely provocative analysis of Palestinianism from our source material. It's a perspective that, challenges a lot of common narratives, looks at beliefs, money, psychology.
It really shows how complex these ideologies can be, doesn't it? How they're presented as being shaped by history, by grievances, real or perceived, by material factors, and even by these quite fundamental human psychological patterns of desire and reaction. It's one specific lens laid out in the material on a very, very difficult conflict.
So as you, our listener, think about everything we've discussed today, here's a final thought to chew on, drawing from that materialist argument earlier. If, as the source suggests, ideologies need people, and people need food and shelter to carry those ideologies, what might be the really long-term consequences of any system, intended or not, that fosters dependency and perhaps discourages self-reliance? Something to think about.